everybody. This is Seth. Welcome to the Aging Intelligence podcast, where we talk to society's leaders about what they're doing and how they're involved in helping society face its aging challenges. We have today Alex Konrad on the podcast, and Alex is a very, very interesting guest because he usually is the person doing the interviewing. And today we're flipping the tables and I'm going to do the interviewing. So Alex was a senior editor at Forbes for a lot of years. How many years were you there, Alex?
12 years.
12 years. Okay. So that in startup land, that would be forever. And then
it's forever in media too. Yeah.
Okay. So in media counts too. And then Alex went and did something risky. He left Forbes and he launched his own company called Upstarts Media. And at Upstarts Media, he's been interviewing, I think, particularly founders, right? Hence the name. Really looking at companies and founders and what creates durable companies and what lasts and what are people working on. And this is particularly interesting because obviously Honor was a startup at one point. And one of the thoughts when we launched Honor was, hey, if we can help pave the way for other founders to create startups around the aging space, that would be really awesome. And Alex has interviewed a number of founders and companies that have been tackling problems around the aging space generally. So it'll be really interesting to get Alex's opinions and thoughts on the topic. Alex, is there anything I missed in your introduction?
No, that's great. Having a lot of fun 1 year in with Upstarts.
Yeah, awesome. Well, why don't we start there? So many people, like I said, the aging space has a bunch of players in the field, but there are a whole bunch of new players who have come in. And when people think about, should I do a startup? Does it make sense? Can you take us through just your own journey? Like, how do you decide to bail from something that seems pretty stable with a pretty big name, Forbes, and do your own startup?
Yeah, I think back in the day, a lot of people started companies because they felt like they maybe had maxed out their jobs at a place like Google or, Meta. And I think for me, it was a little bit similar where after 12 years at Forbes, I felt like I had checked off all the boxes that I had aspired to and was kind of pursuing side quests. And I'm a very impatient and motivated person. And so to not have everything building towards a new challenge was hard for me. And then I thought, if I'm going to do something new, I don't want to just run it back and do another Midas list of top VCs or, a lot of the sort of same cover story type stories for a different newsroom. I should just blow it up, do the craziest thing and start my own company and think about what media should look like, moving forward. And so I definitely kind of took the riskiest, but I think the most exciting route.
And how has that been? Like, you leave, it's all exciting, and then reality hits. Like, what's different versus what you thought you were getting yourself into?
I think the biggest lesson has been that I am my own biggest blocker and sort of, worst enemy in the sense that I don't infinitely scale. I think we're thinking about expanding Upstarts in the future so that there are ways to do more than just me. But ultimately, my reporting, my role in the ecosystem is a lot of our product. And so the biggest challenge for me is that I could spend 100% of my time doing fun interviews like this. I could spend 100% of my time just writing articles, and I could spend 100% of my time selling sponsorships that bring us revenue. But if I did any of those things too much, everything else would go on fire. And that has been a sort of a balancing act that I feel like you really need to experience firsthand as a founder.
For sure. Okay. So you just had this experience. You've got someone out there who's thinking, geez, I should start a company that somehow helps in the aging space, right? Somehow helps older adults in one way, shape, or form. What do you say to that person if they come to you and say, hey, should I do a startup?
Well, I think first off, it is good to have a mission that you care about. I think I'm seeing firsthand that if you don't love what you're doing, startups are just so much work and it is easier to not do it, right? So I think if you're gonna do it, you have to be really passionate about it and really want to attack the opportunity because it is a 7-day-a-week job. I know you've lived this as well, Seth, over many more years than I have. So that'd be my first thing. The second thing I'd say is, what is your right to win? Why do you care about, let's say, the aging population or elder care or one of these areas? What do you bring to the table that is unique there? And then we'd kind of get more detailed from that sort of starting point. But I think very linearly in terms of sort of like, okay, like do you really want to do a startup in the first place? Is this a random idea, or should you really be doing this? And then we can talk about, is it an insane idea?
Yeah. So it's funny the way I talk about that. It's actually my number one criteria I evaluate founders by. Like if I'm trying to figure out, is this person likely to win, right? In the company that they're creating, I say, how many times can they hit a brick wall and get back up and keep going? Because startups are lots and lots of successive brick walls. And if you don't hit them and then figure out, okay, this one I'm going to, kind of tunnel under, and that one I'm going to throw a rope over, you're in trouble. And like the only way you get that energy when you get to year 5 or year 7 is that you truly, truly love the mission. And I think it is one of the reasons, at least in the aging space, that you see founders being able to tackle it, because it often calls to people because of something that happened in their own lives. And I'm kind of curious about that, because I've seen you write about a couple of companies recently in the aging space. So it's a space that you're following a little bit, which is actually kind of rare because a lot of people just don't follow the space. Is there something that happened in your life? Like, is there someone or something that kind of made you more attuned to that space?
100% there is. Shout out to my 93-year-old grandma, Lucky, in Connecticut. Lucky is someone who means a lot to our whole family. She's my only living grandparent. And she's also someone who has embraced technology in very kind of amazing and endearing ways. One of the first times I ever went viral on Twitter/X was because I posted a screenshot of my family group chat years ago where someone had responded to my grandma with a GIF of Steve Harvey clapping. My grandma had tried to figure out how to make Steve Harvey stop clapping. She thought it was going to kill the battery on her phone and had gotten so flummoxed that she'd gone to the Verizon store in Connecticut to try to make them, stop Steve Harvey from clapping. And these updates were just adorable, and she's gotten very good at texting. But Mashable, all these websites like a decade ago covered my grandma's tech moment, and wow. Verizon even had her like reunite with the salesperson, and it was like this hilarious thing where many years later I meet a media union rep, and she's like, we've met before, and I was like, I'm sorry, I don't know how, and she said, I covered you and your grandma, many years ago in Mashable or one of these sites. So that was really funny. And then more recently, my grandma has talked to an Alexa, and she's seen technology in her assisted living facility. And that was really a big trigger moment for me, because I was thinking, my grandma asked it to play the Bee Gees, asked for the weather, but she really kind of wants to talk to this thing more than it can handle. And also, like, what are the other ways that technology could be helping her and her friends in this facility? Yeah. And that just kind of unlocked this whole side of my brain that when I started Upstarts, I was like, you know what? I now have myself as an editor. I can write about this as much as I want. And so it really was an intentional thing. Like, is this a technology that could help my grandma is one question that I asked myself.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So so this is like a really interesting topic, because when you talk to people who have been kind of, let's call it, toiling away in the aging space, right? It could be someone who's in a more traditional business and they're working in an assisted living or, a SNF. It could be someone who's doing a startup in the space. But there's always this kind of underlying feeling of what I'm working on is like really, really important. It's important for society. It's being done to give back to society. And yet, like, people don't care, right? Like, the powers that be don't care. The media doesn't care. They're off covering the next hot thing. And no one cares about this big societal challenge. Like, how should people operating this space think about that? Like, why do you think they find it harder to get attention? And like, should it even matter to them?
I think there are two big challenges we're facing there. One is that the customer is not an early adopter, tech savvy, highly online person sharing their story, posting it on Twitter. And I think, the sad reality of a lot of news today is that journalists can write about a lot of topics. If the story doesn't get picked up by the ecosystem, there's a very good chance an algorithm never shows it to you. When you see people complain, why is nobody covering this topic? Honestly, usually someone is. It's just that it's not getting in front of you. Most of my followers are not seeing any one article I write. And so I think one challenge is that we don't have great advocates for these stories who are helping them reach a wider audience. And that creates a negative feedback loop where if there are no advocates, the story's not doing well for the reporter and their editor is not letting them write about that topic in the future. Then I say the second challenge is that this stuff takes a really long time. I mean, how long have you been working on Honor? When I talk to some of these, I talk to some of these new founders and I'm like, you're signing up for, a 10-year slog. This is not going to be one of those cursor like, AI, record ARR stories, right?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So that's really interesting. So what people have to understand, because you just said something in there that's implicit, but I want to make it explicit for everybody. So you're a journalist, you're going to write something. And what you need to think to yourself is, given the way algorithms work, given the way media works, is this thing actually going to get picked up? Like, are eyeballs going to hit it? And it's going to get picked up if the algorithm picks it up, basically, I think is what you just said. And so it's got to be on a topic that the journalist believes lots and lots of people are going to choose to click on. Is that roughly accurate?
Yeah, I mean, at the broadest strokes, I would say yes, because if you think about it another way, to try to just make this relatable to people, let's say there are at least 20 startups in my head that at any given time, I'm like, these are cool companies. I love the founder. I think the technology is really cool. Why am I not just writing about those 20 companies and emptying the list constantly? Because there isn't the right time or the news peg or the meta discussion around their area such that anyone will pay attention. And you only get sort of limited shots on goal per technology or per founder to talk about. And so there's nothing more devastating than to spend a lot of time on a story, try to sell it to the world, and nobody reads it. The founder feels bad, like they spent all this time with you and they're not getting any boost from it. And also, like, it just feels pretty sucky to have no one reading the work that you put out. So getting that kind of sense of taste of when is the market ready for this article is unfortunately a big part of media today.
Yeah. And so that's really interesting. So when you think about the timing of when the market is ready, is that because you see the conversation online move to a given topic? Like, it's the season for Medicare renewals, for example, because I saw you just wrote about Chapter. And so, since lots of people are searching on Medicare right now, therefore, now is a good time to write about that company. Is that the way you think about it?
It's not quite that specific, although I do know of journalists who will check Google Trends, and we've seen multiple startups even come up with new versions of that where they're trying to basically do the market research to say, hey, this topic is very relevant. Honestly, I could probably do a better job of that. For me, it's sort of like, has there been a wider conversation happening in the news around this category? Have there been major fundraisers or customer signs, product launches? And I think obviously this is one area where startups are very competitive with each other. But if there's more hype around a competitor or a category, that's actually better for attention to everybody. And then if there isn't really any of that, I'm looking for a hook from the company that could be my easy why now. So for example, with the robots I wrote about from this startup Andromeda going into senior homes, they were launching in the US and they're going to be actually shipping their robots to homes in California for the first time. That was my justification of the why now, but candidly, it might have still been too early. Like there's a good chance these guys go on CNN on 60 Minutes in a year or two and everyone's like, oh, that's obvious. And no one really cares that I was early on the story, except me.
Right. Yeah, totally makes sense. Okay. So there's this other thing that I think you've talked about, which is kind of interesting. And it certainly relates to people who are operating in the aging space. Curious to get your take on it. Is what is a company that is kind of durable versus hype? Because like when you're thinking about, I actually call what you just said, like, hey, the world's talking about it now, therefore we should talk about it. I call that meme hopping. And startups have this tendency to meme hop, right? And it's because they're seeking attention, right? It's like if I want an investor to put money in, if I want a reporter to write about it, I kind of have to be on meme. And if I'm not on meme, then it's a lot harder to either get money or get, attention or whatever it might be that startup kind of needs to help fuel its growth. There's this huge risk in meme hopping though, which is you always hop, you keep changing what your company kind of does at core, and then you're never focused and you never really win because you don't stay in a space. And so that's almost like the antithesis in a way to a company that's durable, because like if it's always meme hopping, that's like almost definitionally not durable. So like, how do you think about this company, these founders, this principal, like whatever it is, when you're looking at and evaluating a potential startup or a later stage company, what makes durability?
I think you want to see clarity of direction with the nimbleness to catch whatever wind is kind of behind you. You don't want to see a boat that is just changing course constantly, to your point. That shows indecision, lack of differentiation. And also we've seen startups fail because they try to do too much too fast, right? They have 5 ideas. Like, you should just have one really good idea. That said, I think, this is true for Upstarts as a small startup ourselves. You will see these winds going by that could be tailwinds or headwinds, and you obviously want to have the wind at your back. And so if that's a discussion around loneliness with, companions, or it's about, people living longer and what are the diet implications, like, as there might be trending stories, I think you can draft off of those in a way that is beneficial without being so cynical as like, let's refocus our entire product. With Upstarts, for example, the sale of TBPN to OpenAI set off a big conversation around new media. And it would be silly for me not to engage with that, even if I'm not really an apples to apples, competitor to TBPN. Those guys are friendly with me, but just their sale just got people talking about media, and that helps me. Does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, totally. And so when you kind of get past the meme hop, then you get to a company that's like, okay, we're doing this, and you evaluate kind of more the fundamentals. So like when we launched Honor, we actually had this criteria for the kind of company we would do. And we said it had to be a company that we thought was a legacy company. And what we meant by that is it needed to be the kind of company where we believed it would actually have the right to outlive the founders. So that's a pretty long-lived, hopefully that's a long-lived statement, right? Like, hey, this thing should last for many, 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 many decades. I hope.
We would hope, yes. I knock on wood on that, yeah.
Yep. But so how do you think about that? Like, how do you think about the like qualities of a company or the qualities of a founding team that can endure over decades, as opposed to, and this thing's just kind of a flash in the pan?
Well, it's gotten harder to answer that in this AI era, for sure. I was just talking to a very popular AI app maker a couple hours ago, and I was basically asking that question, which is, what is a moat today? If your technology could be copied by the big labs in 3 months, what does that actually mean for the long-term, future of your business? They said, well, if we have a 3-month moat, we just have to keep iterating and trust that we are on the marathon of improve, ship, and just constantly stay 3 months ahead. Not the most maybe relieving answer, or if I were them, I'd feel, yeah, it is. Yep. But it almost reminds me of a story. There's an old cliche story that I think an early technologist told of the people picking up dimes in front of the steamrollers, where you have the giant companies of the steamroller going down the road, and they're not going to stop and pick up the dimes on the street. If you're a small startup, maybe you can run in and make a good business just picking up all the coins faster than they get to you. But if you ever mess up, they squish you and you're dead. So I think, for a lot of these startups right now, speed and ability to ship fast is their moat. I think you have to really believe in the team to feel good about that. Because otherwise, I personally usually feel more comfortable writing about a product I think could be disruptive over a long time. For example, in longevity, I had the CEO of Loyal on my show. She actually started out in human longevity, saw a faster route to progress with dogs and canine longevity, and is in a clinical trial to extend the lifespan of dogs. Now, she would love to go back to humans someday, I think, but like this dog project will be the next 10 years of her business. And that is easier for me to intellectually understand than like, we will ship a new thing every month, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's funny because I think the founder of that is Celine, and I think I just saw her 2 days ago. So
yes, Celine is a great founder. I love showcasing people like her. Yeah.
Yeah, she's awesome. That's pretty interesting. Just quick thoughts is, I guess, a 12-year entrepreneur on picking up dimes in front of a steamroller. That only works if you never scale, right? Because the problem is that if you want to do kind of a lifestyle business or a business that kind of never gets big and never has big impact, then sure, maybe you can run around faster than the labs. But at some point, you want to be the labs, right? And if you want to be them, you will slow down because you will be bigger. And it actually turns out that it is harder to move fast when you're big because you have all these vested interests, and you need to make sure if you ship a product, you don't break 100 million other people's product that you've already shipped to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if your only moat is, hey, I can run a little bit faster and more nimble, you die. It definitionally, if you scale. And so there's got to be something else there. I think what is different today, it's really interesting, is just software alone almost always cannot be the answer, right? Because just software is so easy to move so fast on. In fact, when we were starting Honor, one of our default concerns was that we were 35 and having our first kids. And we were like, this is a problem because like we are no longer the 25-year-old entrepreneurs without kids, drinking Red Bull all night, staying up coding all night. And if we do a startup that's exposed to that kind of risk, right, where those, young people, no kids, no obligations, can just outcode us all night, we're dead over the long haul. And so we better do something that has real either network effect or real assets, like something that's hard to put together. And I think that is, by the way, a property of the aging space, because I think in the aging space, customer acquisition is particularly hard. And if you manage to find a channel or a right to win, as you put it, where you can actually get those customers, there's often defendability in that, as well as kind of creating hard assets or a data moat. And I'm curious if you, like in the companies that you've looked at in the aging space, because you've looked at a couple recently, a robotics company, a Medicare, I think it's kind of a Medicare broker chapter. What do you think is unique about those companies? Like what sets them apart from other companies that you see that are not in the aging space, if anything?
Well, Chapter was interesting because the CEO, Kobe Blumenfeld-Gantz, said to me that what their big unlock was a twist on product market fit. They call it product market channel fit, where basically by going nationwide from the get-go and by basically providing scale to the insurance providers such that they eliminated complication for them, they were able to lock in these better rates that basically, according to him at least, only piss off legacy Medicare brokers. He said he's quite hated by like that subset of the community, but the insurance providers surprised him by being okay working with Chapter because it just saved them a lot of time, even if the money was a little bit less. And so he claimed to me that they're saving seniors $1,100 to $1,200 per year on average on their Medicare, which is pretty cool. But the unlock there was to drop down paid marketing spend and trying to go direct to people and find these channel partners who saw them as just making their lives easier. I'd say it's different with the robots. The robots, they have to go in and have people on site, kind of the equivalent of forward deployed engineers, and show a home, hey, this is how our robot, delights your seniors. And, hey, 40% or more of seniors don't get any visitors ever in these facilities. And so having this friendly, bright colored, not spooky looking robot that can speak 90 languages will really help solve that problem for you. And for them, they have to kind of get the trial to get people to buy in, and they don't have like an awesome channel network there. So they're just going for, let's say, the companies that have 12 homes or 20 homes and trying to kind of roll up those customers.
Yeah. That does sound a little bit harder. What have you seen when you look at these companies? What do you think the channels are that are the most effective? Like when you look at the companies you've covered in aging, what strikes you as like, wow, that's actually differentiated and a good approach?
Well, I think, social media is not the answer. I think people spend a lot of money historically on Facebook and other channels, and I think those are just getting harder and harder. I think that direct relationships through either these facilities or their people's children, like that is the better approach. If I were to try to sell to my grandma right now, I would not try to sell to her via Gmail or social media. I would either sell through her kids or through her home where she's part of this big community. So
that makes total sense. Cool. And how about, so like everyone's thinking AI these days. You must cover AI a ton, right? Outside of the aging community in general. And I know you recently said this like interesting quote, which is AI won't, I think you said AI isn't real until we stop calling it AI. And what did you mean by that? Like, what is that idea?
So at one point at Forbes, I created this list called the Cloud 100. It's supposed to be the 100 best cloud startups in the world. And it was a great way to write about cool companies like Stripe and Wiz and Canva. But as I was running this list over the 10 years, it got harder and harder because what was not a cloud company?
Right.
What company isn't on the cloud? Should Ramp and Brex and fintech companies be cloud companies? They certainly operate in the cloud. Should the AI companies be cloud companies? And if it just felt like cloud started to be table stakes for most businesses. And I think we see this with every major tech cycle, with mobile, with cloud, and eventually possibly with AI, where everyone has an AI tool in them. And unless the AI is your product, in the sense that it must be differentiated to run your business, I just feel like it's going to be like asking someone, do you have an app or do you operate on the internet?
Yeah, for sure. That's really interesting. So your basic point is, look, like it's a tool, AI is a tool. And I think to say what you said in slightly different words, it's almost like if you're not using AI at this point, what are you doing if you're doing a tech startup, right? Or a tech company in general? Like there must be AI embedded in there, but you're not going to keep talking about yourself as an AI company because it's just table stakes and everybody would definitionally be that. And so we'll go back to kind of segmenting companies into, okay, but your fundamental purpose is this thing here, like aging. Is that really where you are on it?
Yeah, I think from the startup side, that is the point. Like, if I were looking at a startup deck, it's where are you actually different from everybody else? And just having an AI chatbot is not likely to be that. And then on the flip side, I would say if we talk to people who are scared of technology, and a lot of Americans have a negative association around AI, I empathize with those concerns. But at the same time, I bet we could find uses of AI in a lot of those people's daily lives that they just don't even think of as AI anymore.
Yep, totally. Yeah, awesome. To the entrepreneurs who are going to listen to this, a bunch of them are probably thinking to themselves, Alex is the guy or one of the guys who I would be
or was the guy.
Well, like you're still doing a media company.
No, that's true.
So, and they're thinking, how do I get him to actually want to cover what I'm doing? Like, how do I get him to know about me? How do I get him to, so like, how should they even approach you? Right? How would they A, get you to listen, B, get you to actually maybe consider covering them? Like what is the right approach for people?
I think that as we have technology that can allow us to spam people better than ever, via agents writing supposedly custom emails, whatever it is, I think that real connections and introductions will, of course, have the biggest premium. My guess is this is probably true for your inbox too. If you get a recommendation from another founder or someone you really trust, that will have a huge multiplier. And for me, it's exactly the same. A lot of my favorite stories come from other founders, passing along my name or sending me a text. If that's not the case, I think, we just live in a world with very limited empathy right now. Yeah. And when founders show that they've actually read a story that I wrote that resonated with them or have a good reason why Upstarts is the right brand to tell their story, that will make me much more likely to engage. Because the reality is I'm not as big as Bloomberg or the New York Times or one of those outlets. And so there has to be a good reason why you're excited for it to be me to tell your story. If it's just like, hey, we went down a list and you're number 7, and so we're going to ping you before we hit number 8, I can kind of tell that at this point with my pattern matching, and that will not inspire me to spend my limited time on a founder, right?
Yeah. It's a really good point you make there. Like the effectiveness of my inbox has become like near zero because there's so many ostensibly, personalized, tailored emails I'm getting. And it's just like, they're all written by AI, right? I'm just like, I just need to write an agent that sniffs out every email I get that's written by an agent to respond to that agent that just says, hey, like I'm an agent too. Let's have a conversation with each other. But I'm never going to read it. Like when I see those things, it's on auto delete at this point. So yeah, it's an interesting world.
I do think we are moving towards that future where, for better or worse, an AI assistant will basically say, "Hey, Seth, we did do our pre-call agent to agent convo, and this feels like a high priority meeting for you to take." Or,
Yeah.
"Hey, this person cut corners trying to reach you, but it's a decent idea. Let's make it medium priority." And then, of course, to your point, 90% is slush that you just never see.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that really feels like where it's going. It's interesting. How about just like, a couple of our topics before we close out here? The funding environment right now is kind of interesting. I'm sure you cover that and kind of watch it, pretty extensively, either directly or through the companies that you cover. And, there's obviously, you've got founders working on the aging, anything aging. And they're worried, well, I'm not in the hype cycle at the moment, right? Because the investors want to do AI and only pure AI or whatever it might be. What do you see from your vantage point in terms of what is getting funded, kind of what works, what investors are getting excited about, and how would you advise someone who really wants to do a startup in aging to be able to do something that would get the, kind of attention of an investor?
I think that life sciences and some more very domain specific and regulatory specific areas are some of the actual places where people say the AI labs are not the biggest threat, might be more likely to partner. I've written about a few life sciences companies that currently work with the Anthropics and OpenAIs. And I think that if you are deep within, blood testing or helping with, some sort of medical condition facing an aging population, or, the companionship, any of these places, I think the general purpose labs are not going to see that as the biggest opportunity. And so I think a narrative around what do those labs unlock for us, that since we are obsessed about this problem, we can benefit without competing, that is still a very compelling narrative to investors. I think the first question investors ask is, why won't OpenAI or Anthropic do this right now, or Google, depending on where you are?
Yep.
And so I think if you can answer that and then show a growth story that uses the AI tech, it's actually a pretty good time to be fundraising. I think to your point, if you're deep in consumer or other areas where the AI doesn't help you at all, what you're battling is that opportunity cost of an investor being like, I see a faster path to a 10x return with that AI-enabled vertical. Why should I be investing right now in your pure consumer play or something like that? And that's unfortunate, but just the reality of the market.
Yeah, it is amazing. I actually just talked about this a couple of weeks ago at our national convention, and I was taking our franchisees and our Homestead network through hype cycles, or platform shifts. And I was like, okay, well, you've got these historical platform shifts, like maybe the Industrial Revolution being one of the older ones that we can think about that have analogs to what's happening today. But then you can easily do like kind of mainframe to PC. You can do PC to web, web to mobile, and now you're kind of in mobile to AI. And there's this repeated pattern in every one of them, right? You can kind of say, okay, in every one, certain things always happen. I didn't call out something you just said, but it's so true. In every single one of those platform shifts, a couple of new companies happen in those shifts. And then every VC investor will say to every company pitching them, why will that company not do it? Right? Like, it'll be whatever the company is at the moment, but why would, Anthropic not just copy what you're doing? And the reality is, as an entrepreneur, you need to have an answer, even if ultimately it usually turns out that those very large, kind of the mega scale companies don't actually end up doing everything. But it does feel a little different this time around, doesn't it? Because they especially Anthropic, I guess you could say, they really are kind of going into almost every space. And you really do have to think to yourself, what is my moat? Why can't they just go do it?
Yeah, and I think hours of code is less and less of the moat there. And so it used to be you could say, hey, well, we just spent 2 years building this thing. They're 2 years behind us. Not necessarily the case if they can brute force with AI and a lot of, agents. Yeah. And there it's sort of like, why did we build this in a way that even if you could vibe code this or recreate it, you're missing a key piece of proprietary data or a customer relationship that cannot just be like, made up by AI. And I think that's sort of the $1 billion question.
Yeah, no, the way I think about it is if you're a startup or large, it doesn't matter. You can be a large code today and you can be in deep risk, right? And it really feels like you either have some kind of proprietary channel access, you have some kind of hard assets that create a network effect. They were like hard to put together. And you can't just brute force those hard assets because, like think about, home instead or honors business, right? We have 35,000 care pros in America on our network, and they need to be paid. And the way they're paid is by having customers who have demand for them. And so it would be very hard for someone to create such a large network overnight because you need the customers too. And so, that's your classic network effect. So you either have like a hard asset with network effect, you have a channel, or the third is you have some really large data moat, right? And it's a data moat that the AI labs can't just go get, but rather it probably was spawned off of your proprietary data. And so you are making yourself better over time in a way that no one else can copy because your data makes you superior to everybody else without that scale. But it feels like those are the three things in today's world that can create like true enduring value, not 2 years ahead of code, because that can, these days in a week, that could be undone.
Right. And I think then the question you have to think a little defensively, and I know founders love not to think about the competition, but like if you brought me into Honor, I'd be like, okay, if an agent could in 5 minutes ping every care person, 35,000 people or more, making them a compelling offer, why would they all ignore it? Why would Honor still win if just their ability to try to roll up the network was a lot easier? And then on the flip side, if ChatGPT or someone could make an app that was such a killer app that all your people in your marketplace were using that app, and then they could sort of use that as a Trojan horse into doing other stuff, how would you address that? And I don't think you're facing either of those, but that's where I would be just like looking around the corners, if you will.
Yeah. So what you're talking about there is actually, it's an awesome point. You'll see why I think so in a second. I call those orthogonal attacks. So any company that's sitting there thinking, hey, I'm just immune, they are definitionally wrong. Because for any company, you can come up with kind of what would the orthogonal attack on that company be? And if I launch that attack, how, what would happen to that company? And the companies, I think, have to think about it too, right? You've kind of got Andy Grove's Only the Paranoid Will Survive. And really, it's kind of how do I make sure, I being, given person running a company, large or small, that I don't get displaced by one of these orthogonal attacks, but rather I'm the one running the attack rather than being subjected to the attack. So I'm right there with you.
Yeah. And that's the key, right? If you disrupt yourself, then you control your fate.
Yes, exactly. Last question for you. It's something that I ask everyone I interview. And I always, and I mean when I interview for a job, but I've brought it over into podcast land as well. I'm always really curious, why people do what they do, like where the fundamental energy comes from. Because, anyone can kind of wake up in the morning and decide I'm either going to kind of take the day off and I don't really have the energy to do my job, or I'm excited to go, kind of run through that next brick wall. Where do you get your energy? Like now as a startup founder, like you got to get your energy from somewhere and you need a lot of it. Where does it come from for you?
Well, I would say first, just to be honest, I am not one of these young people who's like, I'm going to stay up till 3 a.m. every single night working on my business because I'm going to change the world. I think I, for better or worse, have a more measured approach where I'm just trying to make a mark by, doing something that's valuable for the ecosystem and also have a life because I want to do this for a while and not burn out in a couple of years. But I think what really motivates me is that I love information. I love spending time with founders. And I think I have a superpower in synthesizing all that info and knowing that timing we talked about and being able to sort of articulate why something matters or not to that audience. I don't want to be making the news myself really, unless Upstarts does, phenomenally well and we've earned it. But I do think that we can be an accelerant and a chronicler of really high impact things and technologies before they're well known. And I just love having a seat at that table. If I wasn't doing this, I'd probably be an archaeologist or a historian. And I just get to do this with history that's literally happening as we speak, changing every day. And that's for me an even more fun challenge.
Yep. That's awesome. Very cool, Alex. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I really appreciate it. It was super, super insightful. And I'm sure I'll be seeing you again real soon.
Thanks so much for having me, Seth. Fun chat.
All right. See ya.